Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in history when everything changes, when the impossible becomes reality. Imagine two of the world's greatest superpowers, nations with colossal armies, wealth beyond measure, and centuries of dominance, brought to their knees by a force they never saw coming. What if I told you that a group of people, outnumbered, outmatched, and underestimated, would rise from the deserts of Arabia and shake the very foundations of the world? What if I told you that their secret weapon was not just swords and strategy, but something far more powerful, something that even the greatest empires couldn't defeat? This is not just history. This is the greatest underdog story ever told. And by the end of this speech, you will not only understand how Islam triumphed over the superpowers of its time, but you will also see why this truth still matters today. The world has always been shaped by empires, massive, towering forces that seem invincible in their time. They possess vast armies, unimaginable wealth. The superpowers of every age believe they will stand forever. But history tells a different story. No matter how mighty every empire has fallen, what is the force that brings them down? More often than not, it is not another empire, but an idea, a belief, a faith so unshakable that no sword, no treasury, no political strategy can stop it. When Islam emerged in the 7th century, the world was divided between two superpowers, the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire. The Persians ruled with an iron grip, their kings believing themselves to be divine, their society built on class divisions that crushed the weak under the weight of the elite. The Byzantines, on the other hand, held on to their power through a rigid system of control, heavily taxing their people and enforcing their rule. Both empires had dominated the world for centuries. They saw themselves as undefeatable. But in the deserts of Arabia, something was happening that would change everything. At first, it seemed insignificant. A small group of people following the message of one man, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, calling for the worship of one God. They had no wealth, no political power, no army, just faith. Yet, in less than a century, they would not only challenge the Persian and Byzantine empires, but completely dismantle them. How could this happen? The answer lies in the nature of their struggle. The Persians and Byzantines fought for land, for power, for wealth. The early Muslims fought for something different. They fought for truth. They were not driven by greed or ambition, but by a belief that the world needed justice, that tyranny had to end, and that every human being had the right to live under a system of fairness. This is what made them unstoppable. When the armies of Islam faced the superpowers of their time, they were always outnumbered. They had fewer soldiers, fewer weapons, fewer resources. But what they had was conviction. At the Battle of Qadisiyah, the Muslim army stood against the Persian forces, which were larger and better equipped. The Persians fought with war elephants, their soldiers dressed in expensive armor, their generals but the Muslims had something that the Persians lacked: absolute faith in their cause. They were not afraid of death because they believed in a purpose greater than life itself. They knew they were part of something that would change the course of history. The same happened with the Byzantines. At the Battle of Yarmouk, the Byzantine army was many times the size of the Muslim forces. The emperor had gathered his best warriors, thinking that sheer numbers would crush the believers. But history does not favor those who rely only on material strength. The Muslims fought with discipline, with strategy, and with an unwavering belief that they were part of a divine plan. By the end of the battle, the Byzantines were fleeing, their once mighty empire beginning to crumble. It is important to understand that Islam's victory over these superpowers was not just about the battlefield. It was about ideas. People under Persian and Byzantine rule saw the justice and equality that Islam offered, and they embraced it willingly. They saw a system where rulers were not tyrants, but servants of the people, where wealth was not hoarded by the elite, but distributed to those in need, where truth was not silenced, but given a voice. This was a revolution unlike any other in history. What makes this story even more powerful is that it did not end in the 7th century. The lesson remains alive today. Superpowers continue to rise, believing they will last forever. They build their strength on military dominance, on economic control, on the illusion of invincibility. But history has proven that no empire stands forever, that continues to inspire and reshape the world is faith. Not just belief in religion, but belief in a cause, in justice, in something greater than personal gain. Islam's victory over the superpowers of its time is not just a story of the past. It is a reminder of a truth that remains unchanged. Material power is temporary, but conviction in truth is eternal. Those who fight only for worldly gain will always be defeated. But those who stand with unshakable faith, those who live and die for something greater than themselves, history has shown that they are the ones who truly shape the world. The world in the 7th century was dominated by two colossal empires, the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Persian Sassanid Empire in the east. These were not ordinary kingdoms. They were superpowers, unmatched in military strength, economic wealth, and territorial control. For centuries, they had dictated the course of history, shaping the political landscape of the world. Their rulers sat on golden thrones, their armies marched with terrifying force, and their cities flourished with culture, science, and trade. They had fought each other for dominance, locked in endless wars, yet neither could imagine that a new force, one they had barely noticed, was about to bring them both to their knees. Islam did not rise as a conventional empire, did not emerge with a vast army or the backing of wealth. It began in the deserts of Arabia, a land that neither the Byzantines nor the Persians had considered a serious threat. To them, the Arabs were nothing more than scattered tribes, too divided to ever pose a real challenge. But they failed to recognize that something new was happening, a transformation that would shatter the old world order. A group of people, once seen as insignificant, had united under the banner of faith, driven by a cause greater than conquest or wealth. They were not fighting for power, but for a divine mission. This was something the mighty superpowers could not understand, and that misunderstanding would lead to their downfall. The first to collapse was the Persian Empire. At its peak, it was one of the most sophisticated civilizations in history, with grand palaces and advanced bureaucracy and a powerful military. However, beneath the surface, it was already rotting. Corruption had spread within its leadership, and its people suffered under heavy taxation and rigid social divisions. The Persian rulers, believing themselves to be godlike, distanced themselves from the struggles of the common people. When the Muslim armies arrived, they did not just bring war, they brought a new system, one that promised justice, equality, and freedom from oppression. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Qadisiyah. The Persian army, massive in size and equipped with war elephants, stood against the much smaller Muslim force. To any observer, the outcome seemed obvious. How could an army of desert warriors stand against one of the most advanced military forces in the world? But the battle was not decided by numbers. The Persian soldiers fought for their empire, an empire that had already begun to lose its soul. The Muslims fought for something they believed was greater than life itself. Their discipline, strategy, and unshakable faith turned the tide. The Persians, despite their overwhelming strength, were crushed. Their once great empire, which had lasted for centuries, fell in just a few years. The last Persian emperor, Yezdegerd III, fled, desperately seeking refuge, but his empire was no more. The unthinkable had happened. The mighty Persia, a civilization that had once challenged Rome itself, had been erased from the map. The Byzantine Empire, though different from the Persians in many ways, met a similar fate. Unlike the Persians who worshiped their rulers, the Byzantines were a Christian empire. But while their religion preached love and justice, their government was built on heavy taxation, military rule, and social inequality. The people under their control, especially in the eastern provinces, had grown weary of their rule. The Islamic movement did not just defeat the Byzantines militarily, it offered an alternative way of life, one that many found far more just and appealing. The pivotal battle between the Muslims and Byzantines was the Battle of Yarmouk. Here, once again, the Muslim forces were vastly outnumbered. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius had assembled an army from different regions, confident that he could end this rising force once and for all. But his forces lacked unity, fighting for a ruler who saw them as mere tools for expanding his empire. The Muslim army, however, was a single force with a single purpose. They fought with a discipline and determination that the Byzantines could not match. The result was astonishing, one of the greatest military defeats in Byzantine history. Heraclius, who had spent his life fighting the Persians, now found himself fleeing from an enemy he had underestimated. With this victory, the foundations of Byzantine rule in the Middle East crumbled. One by one, its provinces fell, not just through war, but through the willing acceptance of the people. Many Christian and Jewish communities under Byzantine rule saw Islamic governance as a relief. Islam's expansion unfolded gradually, in perfect alignment with divine wisdom. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah, for example, seemed like a setback at first. It was a peace agreement between the Muslims and the Quraysh that delayed their entry into Mecca. However, this period allowed Islam to spread rapidly, as people who previously opposed it began to see its true message. Within 2 years, the Muslims entered Mecca without bloodshed, proving that divine strategy often works through patience and perseverance rather than direct confrontation. The same principle applied to the larger conflicts with Persia and Byzantium, when the Muslim forces began challenging these superpowers, they were vastly outnumbered and had fewer resources. Any ordinary military strategist would have advised against engaging such powerful enemies. But divine strategy operates on a different principle. Victory is not determined by numbers or weapons, but by faith, righteousness, and divine support. This was demonstrated in battles such as Qadisiyah and Yarmouk, where smaller Muslim forces crushed much larger armies. The morale, discipline, and divine conviction of the Muslims made them an unstoppable force. Another crucial part of the divine strategy was the way Islam dealt with the people it conquered. Instead of imposing rule through fear, the Muslims governed with justice and fairness. Unlike the Persians, who had a rigid caste system, and the Byzantines, who heavily taxed and persecuted their subjects. The Islamic system offered social mobility, religious tolerance, and economic justice. This approach made Islam appealing to those who had long suffered under oppression. Many regions did not resist Muslim rule, but welcomed it, seeing it as a path to liberation rather than conquest. The divine strategy also ensured that Islam's influence went beyond military victories. Unlike other empires that collapsed after their military power faded, Islam continued to thrive because it was built on principles, not just force. The fall of the Persian and Byzantine empires was not just about military defeat. It was about the collapse of unjust systems that could not stand against the superior moral and social order that Islam introduced. The teachings of Islam provided a comprehensive way of life that addressed not just governance, but personal conduct, economic fairness, and social harmony. Throughout history, many great empires have risen and fallen, but few have left a lasting impact beyond their military conquests. The difference with Islam was that its victories were not just about land, but about hearts and minds. The divine strategy ensured that Islam did not just spread through the sword, but through conviction, justice, and wisdom. The Persian and Byzantine empires had ruled through oppression and control, but Islam's rule was based on trust, morality, and the genuine well-being of society. This divine plan was not merely about winning battles, it was about creating a civilization that would stand the test of time. And that is exactly what happened. Today, the Persian and Byzantine empires exist only in history books, their power long forgotten. But Islam, the force that overcame them, continues to thrive, guiding millions of people across the world. This is the ultimate proof that the victory of Islam was not just a historical event, but a divine movement that reshaped the world in ways no human strategy ever could. The rise of Islam and its ability to overcome the world's greatest superpowers, the Persian and Byzantine empires, was not due to military strength alone. It was the power of unity and justice that allowed Islam to triumph where others had failed. While the Persian and Byzantine rulers relied on oppression, corruption, and division to maintain their empires, Islam offered a radically different approach. It united people across tribal, ethnic, and class divisions, giving them a common purpose. At the same time, it established justice as a fundamental principle of governance, ensuring that power was used not for personal gain, but for the well-being of society. This combination of unity and justice proved to be the strongest force in history, one that no empire, no matter how powerful, could withstand. At the time of Islam's emergence, the Arabian Peninsula was deeply fragmented. Tribes were constantly at war. Alliances were temporary, and loyalty was often based on blood relations rather than shared principles. There was no central authority, no unified vision, and no system of justice that applied equally to all. The powerful dominated the weak, and disputes were settled. The idea that this divided society could challenge the mighty Persian and Byzantine empires seemed impossible. But that changed with Islam. Islam did not just bring a new religion, it brought a new social order, one built on unity and justice. The first step was to unite the tribes of Arabia under a single identity, not based on lineage, but on faith. Islam declared that all believers were brothers and sisters, regardless of their tribe, race, or social status. This was revolutionary in a world where social hierarchy dictated a person's worth. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, delivered the message that an Arab was not superior to a non-Arab, and that the only distinction between people was their piety and character, it shattered the old systems of privilege and division. This new unity had a direct impact on military success. The Persian and Byzantine armies were filled with soldiers who fought for a wage, many of whom had little loyalty to the empire they served. The Muslim forces, on the other hand, fought with a deep conviction, believing that they were part of something greater than themselves. They were not just soldiers. They were a brotherhood united by faith and purpose. This unity made them resilient, disciplined, and unwavering in battle. Justice was the second pillar of Islam's success. Unlike the Persian and Byzantine rulers, who taxed their people heavily and ruled through fear, Islam established a just system that prioritized fairness and accountability. Islamic leadership was not based on inheritance or aristocracy, but on merit and righteousness. The first four caliphs, known as the rightly guided caliphs, demonstrated this principle in action. They lived humbly, ruled fairly, and ensured that the needs of the people were met before their own. This justice extended to the people under Islamic rule. Unlike the Byzantines, who persecuted religious minorities, and the Persians, who enforced a rigid class system, Islam granted protection and rights to all citizens. Christians, Jews, and other religious groups were allowed to practice their faith freely, as long as they fulfilled their basic civic duties. Many communities, especially those who had suffered under Byzantine oppression, welcomed Muslim rule because it offered them more freedom and security than they had ever known. Economic justice was another crucial factor in Islam's success. The Byzantine and Persian empires were notorious for their heavy taxation, which burdened the common people while enriching the elite. Corruption was rampant, and resources were concentrated in the hands of a few. Islam introduced a more balanced economic system that emphasized charity, fair trade, and responsible governance. The concept of zakat, mandatory charity, ensured that wealth was redistributed to the poor, preventing extreme inequality. Unlike previous rulers who hoarded wealth for their personal luxury, Islamic leaders used state resources to benefit society as a whole. The result of this combination of unity and justice was a movement that could not be stopped. The Persian and Byzantine empires, despite their vast armies and wealth, had lost the trust and loyalty of their people. In contrast, Islam offered a new system where rulers were accountable, where people of all backgrounds had rights, and where justice was not reserved for the powerful, but extended to everyone. This is why, in many cases, the cities and provinces under Persian and Byzantine rule did not resist Muslim expansion, but embraced it. They saw a system that was not just stronger, but also fairer than anything they had experienced before. The fall of the Persian and Byzantine empires was not just a military defeat. It was the collapse of unjust systems that had ruled for centuries. No empire, no matter how powerful, can survive without the support of its people. The Persians and Byzantines had built their power on oppression and division. And when a force emerged that offered unity and justice, their empires crumbled. History has shown that military strength alone is never enough to sustain an empire. The greatest civilizations are not those that conquer by force, but those that win the loyalty and hearts of their people. This is why the legacy of Islam's early expansion did not end with military victories. The regions that came under Islamic rule were not just conquered, they were transferred. The justice and unity that Islam brought did not disappear after a few decades, but became the foundation of a civilization that thrived for centuries. Today, the Persian and Byzantine empires exist only in history books, their once mighty power long forgotten. But Islam, which was once dismissed as an insignificant movement from the desert, continues to shape the lives of millions. This is the ultimate proof that unity and justice are the true pillars of lasting success. Empires that rely on oppression may rise for a time, but they will always fall. Only those built on justice and unity can stand the test of time. The rise of Islam and its triumph over the Persian and Byzantine empires is not just a historical event. It carries profound lessons that remain relevant today. The factors that led to Islam's success, unity, justice, faith, resilience, and strategic vision, are not confined to the past. They serve as timeless principles that can guide individuals, communities, and nations in navigating the challenges of the modern world. When examining the downfall of these once mighty superpowers and the enduring legacy of Islam, it becomes clear that the same patterns of rise and fall apply even today. Those who ignore these lessons risk repeating the mistakes of history, while those who embrace them unlock the key to true success. Faith and moral values played a crucial role in Islam's success, and they continue to be essential today. The early Muslims were not driven by material gain, but by a deep sense of purpose. They believed that their mission was divinely guided and that their struggles had meaning beyond worldly rewards. This belief gave them the courage to face overwhelming odds and to persevere through hardship. In contrast, the Persian and Byzantine soldiers lacked a higher purpose. Many were mercenaries fighting for pay rather than conviction. When faced with adversity, they lacked the motivation to continue. Today, this lesson reminds us that a strong sense of purpose, whether in personal endeavors, business, or social movements creates resilience. Those who work solely for personal gain often falter in difficult times.